Hello and welcome to the Symposium in Sports Science and Performance for 2024. My name is Ruth Montgomery and I'm here today to present to you on practitioner considerations for compensation runs. Thanks go to Mark Obedo for the invitation to share some thoughts with you today. And before we get started, let me give you just a little bit of background about me and how I ended up in the role that I am in today. So I finished school and went straight into an undergraduate degree at Stranmillis University, which is part of Queen's University Belfast. I completed an undergrad in health, sport and physical activity. I went straight from there into Loughborough and completed my master's in sports biomechanics. After that, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do next, so I very briefly dipped a toe into sports development and then very quickly realised that what I actually wanted to do was work in high performance sport. So I moved back home and I was working for Hockey Ireland in their high performance coaching and umpiring. From there then I moved to STATSports. This year I will have been here 4 years and I have loved every minute of it. Hopefully you will all be aware of StatSports and what we do and who we are. For those of you that aren't, StatSports is an Irish-based company formed in 2008 and we are now the world leaders in GPS and tracking technologies. We look after some of the biggest teams in the world, including Rugby World Cup winners, the Black Ferns, South Africa, treble winners in Man City, the defending Olympic hockey champions in Belgium. So starting from its Irish roots, StatSports is now truly a worldwide company. Within StatSports, I work in the account management department, and what that means is I help users get the best out of our equipment, which in turn helps them get the best out of their athletes. You will notice at the end there, I am currently undergoing a professional doctorate in elite performance. So I started that in 2021, and it is essentially based on the use of GPS to investigate its appropriateness in enhancing performance. What we'll touch on today is a little bit of research that I've been doing. So if you have any questions, queries, or problems with it, please feel free to reach out and I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you. So what am I actually talking about today? Well, football is a very simple game with very complex underpinnings. Most fans will turn up on a Saturday, think you play well, score lots of goals, and that's the job done. We're going to take a little bit of a look into behind the scenes today and what it's like for practitioners in terms of scheduling weeks, how a week will look, and the problem that we're going to look at largely exists in every professional setting, whether that be from an under 14, an under 15 team, an under 18 team, or a first team playing in the Premier League, playing Champions League. Most professional players and teams will use a wearable GPS to some extent. So what we're going to do is kind of dig a little bit deeper into some of the problems that might come as a result and how we can kind of best get around that. This visual is taken from Google, so if you have created it, I apologise that you haven't got any credits. But what we have on screen here is an ideal scenario, and this is probably very rare in football, but for the purpose of this presentation, we will pretend that this is how it will look day to day. So you will see in the left-hand side, highlighted by a green box, you have match day, you then have match day +1 as a recovery, match day +2, you start training, you build up through the week, and you return back to match day the following Saturday. How this looks then is a 1 game week. You've got 1 day off. Match day is the biggest loading day of the week. The remainder of the week makes up something between 200 and 250% of what you hit on match day load. So far, that all seems very straightforward, and it all seems to run in straight lines and is very uniform. I am under no illusion that elite sport or sport in any capacity runs in straight lines, and there are some complications and things that will need to be considered during the week. For example, a player gets injured in the first 15 minutes of a game. That means that someone you had planned to be a sub actually plays 3/4 of a game. Equally, if it's a cup game or a cup tie and they play 90 minutes of football, they then play a further 30 minutes of extra time and then have to go and take penalties. How that match day load looks like compared to the week before where they've just played a simple 90 minutes is vastly different. Of course, you will also have players getting sent off, getting cards, whether that be 10 minutes into the game, 15 minutes into the game. They all provide a different challenge. Fixture scheduling, again, will kind of depend on the league and level of football that you play at. in theory, if you play a Premier League game on a Sunday, have a European fixture during the week on a Wednesday or a Thursday, and then play again on a Saturday, on paper that's a 3-game week. In the Championship, double game weeks are very, very common. And then you also have coaches will not want to play the same formation and the same tactics the whole season. So if you go 2-0 down at half time and there's a formation change and a tactical change, those players will all have to come off the pitch. So what happens next for players that don't play a full game? That's what we're going to look at, and we're kind of going to dig in a little bit deeper into the problems that come as a result of that and what practitioners can do to kind of compensate against that. So let's simplify the problem. It was the people that don't start the game. And you will see this quote on screen is taken from a paper written by Samuel Hills in 2020, where it says top-ups are typically prescribed with the aim of helping to compensate for deficits in physical loading for individuals who receive no match play or significantly less than that of a whole match player. So let's take the example of one player who plays 15 minutes at the end of a 90-minute game. He doesn't meet the expected targets for loading in terms of volume or intensity, and as a result we need to give him some form of compensation that will get him back on track so that whenever we start the next week and the next part of his microcycle, that he is fully loaded and ready to go, fully trained for next week. It might seem unusual at this point in a presentation to see a slide that says disclaimer, but what I want to make perfectly clear is that this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody. The point of this presentation is to provoke some thoughts that you can bring back to your sports science team, that you can bring back to your medical team and say, should we maybe try and do X, Y, and Z? We don't live in a perfect world. Things don't run in straight lines, particularly not in elite sport. So the point of this presentation is to help you think, how can we do things better? Do we need to do things better? Oh, that's a valid point. Maybe we can change X, Y, and Z. As I say, things in elite sport are not always easy. And one of the biggest challenges that people face whenever they're trying to do compensation runs or top-up runs directly after a game is where they can do them and how much time they have to do them. You'll see on the screen, this is basically for all English-based leagues. The FA say that you have no longer than 15 minutes, and the home ground staff dictate which areas of the pitch you can use. If you imagine an away game, let's call a spade a spade. Teams can be awkward, particularly if you have just beaten them at home by 2, 3, 4 goals. And there are a lot of things that need to be considered. If at the end of a game you have just won 3-0 away and they say you can have a 5x5 metre box, there is no way that you can get matchday demands in that 15 minutes in a 5x5 metre box. There are other things to be considered, like travel time. Have you got a flight to catch? Have you got a long drive home? What time does the bus leave at? In terms of match congestion, are you playing on the Sunday? You also have another game on the Wednesday. You don't really have enough time to do compensation the following day. When should you do it? Should you do it at all? And probably the biggest one, and the one that will attract most to the sports science staff that are listening to this, is staffing. It's all very well and good if I say, oh, we play on the Sunday. For those players that don't play, we'll do a compensation session on the Monday, and then by Tuesday everyone is fresh and ready to train. Everyone still needs a day off. You don't want to have your staff working 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because if you do that, they also won't be giving you their best and you probably won't get the best returns. So what the point of this is to try and figure out what does work best. Is there something that does work best, and how do we go from here? You will all be familiar with the graphic that is currently on screen. This graphic itself was taken from Martin Boucher from a paper that he wrote along with his colleagues in 2021. Essentially, it shows variations of an old classic, a box-to-box run. I am fairly certain if you asked football coaches up and down the country, they would all be familiar with what a box-to-box run is. And there are some quick wins of including these in your post-session compensation runs. For example, we've previously talked about how groundskeeping staff can be awkward and pernickety about where you can go on their pitch and how long you have to do it. The win about this is you don't need any equipment. You don't need cones, you don't need a measuring tape. really all you need is a stopwatch. So if a groundskeeper says you can have a 5 metre by 5 metre square, you can go outside the touchline and just run up and down there. There are a few other ones. Reps are quick-ish, so you'll see on screen you probably have a work interval of somewhere between 11 and 13 seconds, and then your rest interval is kind of dependent on what your sports scientist sets after that. As a result, you get significant high-speed running meters, and you can get fairly quick reps in. So if you have a 15-minute window, you probably can get the volume of high-speed running that you would have got in the game. How appropriate that high-speed running is, if the primary reason is to mimic game conditions, is what we're going to question next. So if you remember back to the hill slide, the primary reason is to compensate from what they've missed in a game. Probably running 72 metres in a straight line at high-speed running is not the best, but that's what we're going to investigate moving forward. So what you will see on screen now then is a 90-minute female game average, a 90-minute male game average, and their compensation runs and what sort of values they produce as a result. A few disclaimers before you read too much into the numbers. For this, I've used an arbitrary value of 5.5 metres per second for high speed running. That is applied to both male and female. Equally, their compensation runs were both fairly similar in that they were 13 seconds of work, followed by roughly 40 to 45 seconds of rest, just depending on what club and where the data has come from. Again, you will look at this and say the volume that you complete in a 90-minute game is never going to match that of a 15-16 minute compensation session, and I'm under no impression that it would ever be able to do that. But what you will notice is the intensity significantly surpasses a 90-minute game average in the compensation. So if you look at distance per minute for females there, for example, they're hitting in around 100 metres per minute for a 90-minute game, yet in compensation runs can work at 142 metres per minute. Likewise, for accels and decels, you will see there is a massive difference. So in a 90-minute female game, you're hitting 78 decels. In your compensation runs, you're hitting in around 3. Again, for men, hitting around 85 for a 90-minute game, and you're hitting 13 during your compensation runs. As a result then, the per minute values are significantly increased, and what happens as a result of that, if that's trained consistently over the period of a week, over the period of a season, if they train at a significantly higher intensity once a week, i.e. during their compensation session, what happens long term is relatively unknown. So how appropriate is this? Is it the best option? What's the best option? That's what we're going to spend a little bit longer digging into. If it's not the best option, or it's not the most appropriate, what is the alternative? And I guess there are two very obvious options at this point. And the first one would be scheduling, in terms of when you do it, how you do it, and what it looks like. And the second one is in terms of content. What you will see on screen now then is that original microcycle picture that we have taken. Previously match day was highlighted. However, if you have a player who doesn't play any game minutes or plays very few game minutes, they will need significant compensation for how much they have missed. As a result, some people suggest that you should do your best compensation on match day +1. There are a few problems with that. Most people will take match day +1 as a day off if you play on a Saturday and then compensate on a Sunday. How ready are those athletes to then come back into full team training on Monday? Does their microcycle start on the same day? How does their weekly load look if those days are swapped around? There are some things that still need to be considered. Likewise, on screen now then, what you will see is leading towards the end of the microcycle in terms of match day -1 and preparing for the next match day. There is some talk at the moment around preloading players and the problems that are associated with that. We spoke at the very beginning about what happens if a player gets injured. So if it was scheduled that I would come onto the pitch and play the final 15 minutes, but the person I'm replacing gets injured 10 minutes into the game and I end up playing 80 minutes. How does that affect my load? And truthfully, I do think there is some benefit to this. A few days before the game, the coaching staff will know who's part of that playing squad. If you're not part of that match day squad or a travelling reserve or whatever the case may be, I do think there is probably some benefit to starting to preload earlier in the week. However, if you're part of that travelling squad, if there is a chance you could be pulled into the travelling squad, it does seem a bit risky, because you have no idea what's going to happen. Players could be sick, they could be injured, something could happen where they'd miss out. You've preloaded an athlete, it turns up to match day and they're not ready to go, or they don't have enough energy or juice left, essentially, to play 80 minutes or 90 minutes or whatever you need from them.
On screen now then is the third option in terms of scheduling. Probably the easiest way to describe this is a little bit extra each day. You will see it starts roughly match day +2 and goes right through to the following match day. For those of you who have got this far and are thinking, we currently do box-to-box runs post-game for subs or non-players, please do not think I'm telling you to take that out. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. All the point that I'm trying to get across here is, if the point of your compensation session is to mimic what players have missed by missing game exposure, simply doing box-to-box runs probably is not the best way to do that. What you will see on screen then is essentially this will do a little bit every day. So if you do the high speed run in box-to-box post-game, then on your extensive day, on match day -3, when there's lots of accels and decels, you could include an additional small-sided game for those guys who need more compensation. And you can add a little bit extra each day. The pros of doing it this way are that practitioners will still get a day off in the week. Players will still get a day off in the week. You don't have to run a separate session and sit down and think of planning and how you can do that. You, as a practitioner, as a sports scientist, along with your coaching staff, are able to sit down and say, these 4 guys didn't play at all at the weekend, they will need to do an extra rep here and there. Their session might end up being 10 minutes longer. It's 10 minutes each day rather than 90 minutes on one day. For the days where you've got top end speed, they might do an additional rep or whatever the case may be. This just sort of spreads the load a little bit further out over the week. It also means that, largely speaking, players can kind of stay on the same training schedule as those players who did play, and adding a little bit will keep them on track. The graphic on screen now then is, I'm going to take a little bit of time just to set the scene for you. So on STATSports Sauna software, you have the ability to export sprints. For the purpose of this slide and this demonstration, I have changed my sprint to mimic high speed running. So I've changed the entry to 5.5 meters per second as an absolute value, and I've changed the dwell time to 0.5 seconds, so it exactly mimics high speed running. This is taken from a championship football game, and it includes all players, whether they have played 5 minutes, 90 minutes, got injured after 13 seconds, they are all included. The interesting thing for me is, in that full game, there were 491 high-speed running exposures for the whole team. Of those 491 exposures, 2 of them were above 60 metres. And you will actually see both of them on screen, which were completed by a left back. All I've done is simply pull this into a pivot table. So on the left hand side you will have player position and then a breakdown of distance by 10 metres. So 0 to 9 metres, 10 to 19, 20 to 29 and so on. The number to the right under high speed running exposures then shows how many times they had a high speed running exposure that fitted into that distance. The column 1 over to the right of that shows the max speed that they hit in this example. This is 5.5 meters per second is a high speed running threshold. This is in kilometers per hour, so that is 19.8 kilometers per hour. And then the column further over to the right is total high speed running distance that they've achieved. The interesting thing, if you take all players from the full squad, the average high speed running exposure distance is 28.9 metres. If we think back to Boxtobox, there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that it was 72 metres in somewhere between 11 and 13 seconds. If you do the simple maths and go 72 metres, divide that by 13 seconds, that will give you exactly 19.8 kilometres per hour. If we take out the accel and decel phase of that, you're looking on average of 50 metres of high speed running per box-to-box rep. If they're doing 10 reps in 15 minutes, it's likely not that suitable anyway. They would never do that in a game, so you're not even mimicking the high speed exposures that you would get in a game in those box-to-box runs. Essentially what you're doing is getting volume of high speed running. In professional sport, there are hundreds and hundreds of really great practitioners out there who have really great ideas but just don't have the time to execute them. And I have no doubt that if they had more time, sports science would be leaps and bounds ahead of where we currently are. And there is a little bit of this, like we're too busy to improve, and if it's not broken, we don't need to fix it. So hopefully today I've managed to give you enough information that you can go back, you can think about how you currently do things, what your considerations should be going forward, and how you can improve as a group, as a department, as a club, and move on from there. At the start of this, I promised some kind of key take-homes, and they're all sort of on screen, but the biggest one that I want to make perfectly clear is one shoe won't fit all, and there is no best way for every club to turn around and go out and do the same thing. The best way will look very different for everyone, whether that be depending on the age category that you look after, the squad size that you look after, the match fixtures, the schedule, all of those things will look very different. So the key questions that I would encourage you to have a think about and talk about is, what are you doing and why are you doing it? So if we think about what are you doing, is it appropriate? Does it fulfill the needs that you need it to do? So if the point of your compensation is to replicate match day demands, does doing box to box alone do that? Probably not. So what's the best way to get actual match day replication involved somehow? Why are you doing it? Again, if we think of box to box, if you're doing it to get high speed running meters, probably is fairly appropriate. If you're doing it to compensate for what players have missed by not playing a full game, it's probably not appropriate. Equally, if you or your staff don't know why they are doing it, you can challenge it. I can guarantee you that there will be a better way to do it if people don't know why they're doing it in the first place. On the other side of that though, if those two questions align, if you can answer hand on heart what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you can happily say that you're doing the best you can do, you're on to a winner. Like I say, one shoe won't fit all, so if you can say why you're doing it and what you're doing to achieve that, you're on to a winner. And I would praise you for getting that far. And that is kind of the end of where we've got to today. Any questions or challenges, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to me directly or through Marco, and I will get back as quickly as you can. If you want any more information on STATSports or how we can help you, again, feel free to reach out. I'd be more than happy to help where possible. Thanks for listening.